Samurai legends conjure images of fearless sword fighters, hungry for combat glory. But what if history proves their deadliest victories depended on outsmarting rather than outslashing the enemy? In the shadows of famous battlefields, elite warriors devised 6 ingenious strategies to survive while others perished. Every year, direct clashes drained domains, shattered harvests, and forced crippling taxes. So, why did the wisest samurai risk everything only as a last resort? The answer rewrites everything you thought you knew about the art of war and the cost of survival. Every campaign waged by the samurai elite came with a bill that reached far beyond the battlefield. When war drums sounded, domains scrambled to raise extraordinary taxes, sometimes doubling or tripling annual levies just to pay for a single campaign. Peasant villages, already stretched thin, surrendered a quarter or more of their harvest to feed armies and supply horses. With every able-bodied man conscripted, rice fields and workshops sat empty, causing food shortages that rippled through the countryside for years. Domain account books from the Sengoku era record sudden spikes in stipends for warriors, but these payments came at a cost. Local lords mortgaged land, borrowed against future harvests, or seized property outright, leaving entire regions in debt. The economic shock did not end when the fighting stopped. Veterans returned home wounded or not at all, draining communities of skilled labor and leadership. Morale withered as families faced hunger and uncertainty, their sons and fathers missing for seasons at a time. Even victorious domains found themselves weakened, forced to impose new taxes to rebuild castles and restock armories. The true price of battle was measured not just in blood, but in lost harvests, empty villages, and a generation's worth of debt. For the samurai, survival meant more than winning on the field. It meant finding ways to avoid these hidden costs whenever possible. Not every victory carried the same weight in the minds of Japan's military thinkers. Over centuries, samurai leaders developed a silent ranking, a 4-tiered ladder of outcomes that judged not just whether you won, but how. At the very top stood the rarest prize, subduing an enemy without a single sword drawn. This was the ideal, championed by Sun Tzu centuries earlier, and later echoed in the codes of Japan's warrior houses. To force surrender through reputation, alliances, or a stranglehold on supplies was to win with your strength untouched and your people unscathed. A step below sat the victory of minimal bloodshed, using surprise, terrain, or cunning to end a battle quickly and with few casualties. This kind of triumph demanded careful planning and a willingness to strike only when the odds were overwhelming. Next came the acceptable but costly win, one achieved through hard fighting and significant losses, often when no other option remained. Even here, records show commanders weighing the price in men and rice before committing to open battle. At the bottom was the outcome every samurai feared: defeat. To fight and lose was to risk the destruction of one's house, the loss of land, and the scattering of vassals. Early house codes and treatises did not hide their priorities. The duty of a leader was not reckless glory, but to preserve the strength of his domain for future generations. Prudence, calculation, and timid timing were held as virtues. With this hierarchy in mind, each strategy in the samurai playbook can be measured not just by its boldness, but by how well it protected what truly mattered. Night fell heavy over the siege lines at Kawagwe in 1545. Inside the battered castle, a few thousand Hojo defenders waited, surrounded by a coalition army that outnumbered them several times over. Outside, Hojo Ujiesu gathered his relief force, knowing that a daylight assault would end in disaster. Supplies were low, and the besiegers, confident after months of stalemate, had grown careless. Ujiesu chose a different path. He ordered his men to strip away anything that might make noise. No jingling armor fittings, no drums, no conch shells. Warriors tied down loose gear, and every man was warned, break silence, and you risk the lives of all. The plan was simple in outline, but it demanded perfect discipline. As the coalition slept, the Hojo army advanced in darkness, moving like a shadow toward the enemy camp. At the same moment, the garrison inside the castle prepared to break out. The attack was timed so that both forces would strike together, catching the besiegers between hammer and anvil. Confusion erupted in the dark. Coalition commanders fell in the first moments, and panic swept through the ranks. Chronicles record that the Uesugi and their allies, unable to tell friend from foe, collapsed into rout. By dawn, the siege was broken, with Hojo losses minimal compared to what a frontal battle would have cost. Ujiyasu's victory at Kawago was not just a feat of arms, it was a masterclass in perception and timing. By engineering the conditions of the fight, he forced a larger enemy to break before swords could decide the outcome. In the world of the samurai, true strength lay in shaping the battlefield long before the first arrow flew. In the autumn of 1561, the fields of Kawanakajima became the chessboard for two of Japan's most formidable strategists, Takeda Shingen and Uesugi Kenshin. Both men understood that survival in war depended less on valor than on mastering the ground beneath their feet. The plain of Hachimanbara stretched between the Chikuma River and the ridgeline of Saijoyama, offering open space for cavalry and narrow passes for ambush. Shingen's headquarters sat at Kaizu Castle, shielded by the river. Kenshin, holding the high ground on Saijoyama, could watch every move below. Shingen's plan, crafted with his strategist Yamamoto Kansuke, called for a split force. Under cover of night, Kosaka Masanobu would lead 8,000 men up the mountain, aiming to surprise Kenshin's camp at dawn. Meanwhile, Shingen's main body waited on the plain in a formation known as the Crane's Wing, ready to envelop the enemy as they fled downhill. The Chikuma's fords were supposed to funnel the routed Uesugi into a trap, but Kenshin read the terrain as well as any map. Anticipating the attack, he led his entire army down the western slope of Saijoyama under cover of darkness, bypassing Kosaka's column. By dawn, Uesugi troops formed up on the plain, launching a direct assault against Shingen's line before the trap could close. The battle that followed was brutal and close. The real lesson lay in what preceded it. Every hill, river, and open field was a weapon, waiting for the commander who could best read its promise and its peril. At Kawanakajima, ground was never neutral. It was the silent ally that could tip the balance between disaster and survival. Okahazama, 1560. Imagawa Yoshimoto, confident in his overwhelming numbers, paused his march toward Kyoto to rest and celebrate early victories. His army, said by chroniclers to number as many as 25,000, scattered across the low hills and valleys of Owari, their vigilance dulled by recent success and heavy rain. Oda Nobunaga, outnumbered and facing the loss of his domain, did not rush to meet force with force. Instead, he watched and waited, relying on a network of scouts and informants who slipped through the Imagawa lines and reported back on the enemy's mood and posture. One report in the Shincho Koki described Yoshimoto's headquarters as unguarded. The command staff distracted by music and sakishuke, Nobunaga recognized a rare opportunity. He left decoy banners and drums at his main fortress to convince the Imagawa that he remained on the defensive. Then, using the cover of a violent storm, he led a small strike force through ravines and tangled brush toward the enemy camp. The rain masked their approach, and the Imagawa, lulled by the weather and their own confidence, failed to post sentries. When Nobunaga's men burst into Yoshimoto's headquarters, the shock was total. Yoshimoto, startled and unarmored, was cut down before he could rally his troops. The larger Imagawa force, leaderless and panicked, broke and scattered. Nobunaga's victory at Okahazama was not won by numbers or brute strength, but by reading his opponent, sensing overconfidence, exploiting disorder, and striking precisely when the enemy was least prepared. In this moment, awareness and timing mattered more than any sword. Saigo Takamori's campaign in 1877 began with the bold siege of Kumamoto Castle. But it was the decision to withdraw that defined his final months as a commander. By late March, after weeks of bitter fighting, Saigo's Satsuma samurai faced a reality few had prepared for. Ammunition nearly gone, casualties mounting, and imperial relief columns closing in from every direction. The dream of storming Kumamoto faded. Instead, Saigo ordered a fighting retreat, a withdrawal that would stretch across the mountains and valleys of southern Kyushu, buying time and preserving what remained of his force. The withdrawal was not a chaotic flight. At each stage, at Hitoyoshi, Miyakonojo, and Nobeoka, Saigo's core followers used the terrain to their advantage, slipping away from encirclement, launching night raids, and harassing imperial supply lines. Rearguard actions, often led by veteran retainers, shielded the main body as it moved, sacrificing ground but saving lives. Even as their numbers dwindled from more than 10,000 at Kumamoto to fewer than 3,000 by August, discipline held. Ammunition shortages forced a shift from rifle volleys to sword and spear, and by the time Saigo reached Shirayama, many of his men fought with little more than resolve. Throughout these months, Saigo framed each retreat as a necessary step to continue the struggle, not a disgrace. Messages to his followers stressed loyalty and endurance, promising that survival now could mean another chance later. The Satsuma withdrawal became a lesson in cost control, trading space for time, refusing annihilation, and preserving the core of a movement even as defeat loomed in the end. Retreat was not surrender, but a deliberate act of survival, one that kept Saigo's cause alive long after the last cartridge was spent. In the spring of 1584, the fields around Komaki and Nagakuti braced for another round of bloodletting. Tokugawa Ieyasu and Oda Nobukatsu, the heir to Oda Nobunaga, stood against Toyotomi Hideyoshi, whose power was rising fast. Both sides probed each other's lines, dug in on ridges, and exchanged sharp skirmishes, but neither dared a full assault. Each commander understood that a single misstep could mean the end of his house. Rather than gamble on a costly battle, Hideyoshi turned to the tools of alliance and persuasion. He sent envoys to Oda Nobukatsu, offering more than just words, land grants, titles, and a promise that Nobukatsu would retain his family's honor and holdings. Letters from this period, preserved in the Taikoki, reveal the careful bargaining, marriage proposals, hostage exchanges, and the assurance of safety for Nobukatsu's kin. For a young lord facing the shadow of his father's legacy, these guarantees carried weight. Nobukatsu accepted. The coalition that had checked Hideyoshi's advance dissolved almost overnight, leaving Ieyasu isolated. With his main ally gone and Hideyoshi's influence growing, Ieyasu recognized his position. Instead of risking annihilation, he negotiated a settlement that allowed him to keep his territories in Mikwa and beyond, formally acknowledging Hideyoshi's authority. In paper, the campaign ended without a clear victor on the battlefield. In reality, Hideyoshi's web of alliances and shrewd diplomacy had shifted the balance of power. The map of Japan changed not through carnage, but through signatures, marriages, and the quiet movement of hostages, a victory won in council chambers, not on open ground. In the hills of Iga and the misty valleys of Koga, intelligence was an industry as much as a craft. Far from the myth of lone ninja warriors, these regions built networks of operatives, shinobi, and supa who gathered information, tested enemy defenses, and relayed secrets across the warring provinces of Japan. The Bansen Shukai, a 17th century manual compiled from generations of fieldwork, cataloged their assignments in precise detail, counting campfires to estimate enemy numbers, slipping into towns disguised as merchants or monks, and mapping out guard rotations. Payment for such work appears in clan ledgers as irregular stipends, quiet entries labeled for information or special services. Takeda Shingen, famed for his caution, stationed trusted retainers with fast horses at key border posts. When a shinobi returned with news, enemy troop movements, or a weak point in a supply chain, the message moved by relay, rider to rider, reaching headquarters in hours rather than days. This system allowed commanders to act before rumors became reality. Oda Nobunaga, too, invested in Iga and Koga contracts, using their scouts to probe castle defenses and test the loyalty of vassals in contested lands. The value of this intelligence was not in daring raids, but in the quiet accumulation of facts, the number of meals cooked in an enemy camp, the pattern of banners on a distant ridge, the sudden rise in grain prices that signaled an army on the move. Each detail became a thread in the tapestry of survival, allowing samurai leaders to avoid traps, time their attacks, or decline battle altogether. In an age when a single misstep could erase a house from history, the greatest weapon was often a whispered report, delivered in the dark, paid for in silence, and acted on before swords ever left their scabbards. Osaka Castle stood as the last stronghold of Toyotomi Hideyori, its walls rising above a maze of moats and rivers. Tokugawa Ieyasu saw no need for a heroic assault. Instead, he ordered his army to surround the fortress, building earthen ramparts and artillery batteries that cut off every road and waterway. Naval squadrons anchored in Osaka Bay, sealing the city from the sea. This was a deliberate strategy of encirclement. As winter deepened in 1614, food and munitions inside the castle dwindled. Ieyasu's envoys pressed the Toyotomi for terms, offering peace if the defenders would dismantle their own defenses. Under pressure, Hideyori agreed to fill in Osaka's outer moat, a gesture that left the castle vulnerable. By spring, the fortress was stripped of its strongest barrier, and Toyotomi allies had been isolated by Tokugawa diplomacy. The final assault, when it came, was swift and overwhelming. Hideyori's cause collapsed not through a single bloody battle, but through a web of blockade, negotiation, and forced removal of fortifications. The siege of Osaka revealed a layered strategy, victory achieved by strangling an enemy's options until surrender became the only path left. On the morning of October 21st, 1600, banners fluttered across the misty fields of Sekigahara. Tokugawa Ieyasu stood at the head of his eastern coalition, facing Ishida Mitsunari's western army, a force that on paper outnumbered his own. But the true balance of power was hidden in secret letters and uneasy hearts. In the weeks before the clash, Ieyasu had sent promises of land and security to wavering daimyo, none more critical than Kobayakawa Hideaki. Stationed on the heights of Mount Matsuo, Kobayakawa's troops waited, their loyalty uncertain to all but Ieyasu. As fighting raged below, a single volley of musket fire was unleashed toward Kobayakawa's position, a signal or perhaps a final push. In that instant, Kobayakawa's men surged down the slope, not against Tokugawa, but into the exposed flank of their supposed allies. The shock rippled through the western ranks. Other lords, sensing the tide, abandoned Ishida within minutes. What should have been a grinding day-long battle dissolved in a matter of hours. The field was littered with banners, but the war had been decided by betrayal, not by the sword. Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara was written in ink before it was finished in blood. Today, boardrooms and battlefields alike reward those who think before they strike. As global competition intensifies, intelligence and patience, not brute force, tip the scales. The samurai lesson endures. Survival favors those who master the art of restraint. In every arena, the sharpest minds win the longest peace. Share your own strategies below.